We are on chapter 14, section 2, and we're going to be talking about paleontology, the evidence against evolution. What is paleontology? It has to do with fossils. It's actually finding these fossils. And here we have the fossil record actually giving us evidence against evolution. We're going to be talking about fossils, fossil record versus the geological column, circular reasoning, radiometric dating, the Cambrian explosion, missing links, and hominid fossils. Important concepts. First of all, what is evolution? Well, the definition here, changes in the hereditary characteristics of groups of organisms over a course of generations. Well, that's a very general definition of evolution. When we get into it, we're going to be talking about speciation. Speciation is the changes within a particular kind of organism, referring to variation. Speciation would be variation in the gene pool within a population. So what does that mean? It means and examples would be dogs, wolves, and coyotes. Even though they're from different species, they have a probable common ancestor. Speciation is called microevolution. So we do believe in microevolution inside the species and such, but creationists believe in a variation in kinds because it's observed in nature in the Bible. In Genesis 1, God talks about kinds. And the kinds, he says, all produce after their own kind. And so that's what we talk about with microevolution. So here we have microevolution here. We have all these moths here. It's a little bit fat there, but all these moths here. And they're still are moths. You know, they might change within their species, but they still are moths. And then we have all the different kinds of dogs, but all the dogs, they still are dogs. So in birds, all the birds, there still are birds. So this is not, evolution here. Here's a picture of evolution of all, this is the evolution of man. Nah, that is not what we're talking about. That is not microevolution. Macroevolution. Macroevolution is evolution. And macroevolution, the definition would be the hypothetical process by which new kinds of creatures emerge from existing kinds over time. New kinds? Did God say in the Bible anything about that new kinds would come from old kinds? I don't think so. Like this would be an example like amphibians coming from fish, or the macroevolution had never been observed in nature, but now we have, all of a sudden, we see a certain kind producing another kind. It is not happening among living organisms now, and there's no fossil record of macroevolution. Now remember, there's micro, but not macroevolution. Here's a picture of here. Basically all these, we all come from a goo, a common goo cell, a common cell, one cell, and then we evolved over time into all these different animals. Fossils, record of the past. Well, what is a fossil? Well, a fossil, the definition, the remains of plants and animals and humans preserved in sedimentary rock. So we have a lot of fossils now. There's countless billions found, and most during what's called the worldwide flood of Noah. So in paleontology is the study of fossils. And some of these fossils are extinct because they were having trouble living in those post-flood conditions, such as giant mammoths that look like elephants, and dinosaurs, and 40-foot crocodiles have been found, and 2,000-pound turtles, and gigantic birds, and eagle-sized dragonflies. These all have been found in fossils that are now extinct. The fossil evidence against evolution. If evolution occurred, it would have left traces of the processes in the fossil record, wouldn't it? After 2 centuries of excavation, evolutionists have failed to discover any proof of evolution. The kinds that appear are fully formed, and there's no traces of those having evolved into another kind. In addition, the fossil record reveals a record of sudden death and destruction consistent with the worldwide flood in the Bible. Here's a picture here that the fish is just eating, and all of a sudden he's fossilized, you know? And then here we have, of course, here, these are supposed to be missing links that have been contrived, and that basically is taking these and saying, okay, taking a portion of a bone or something and making a missing piece does not work. The necessity of transitional forms. Geologists in Darwin's day expected to find in the fossil record slight changes in different generations of organisms to prove evolution. Darwin, before that time, they hadn't really found a lot of fossils. So he thought, well, we surely will find them. They needed to see these transitional forms, another name for transitional forms would be missing links. So they needed to see these missing links. These are fossils connected on one kind of organism with another kind, or by a series of steps. So Darwin insisted every kind of organism now living would be connected to prove common ancestry with primeval single-celled organisms, which basically said he thought he knew, I should say, that these would all come up suddenly, but they didn't. If evolution were true, there would be countless fossils of traditional or transitional forms or missing links, connecting every kind on Earth with common ancestors by these tiny steps. So you would see in the fossils, you would see, amphibian turning into a reptile, or, ape turning into a human, and we haven't found these missing links. However, this is not the case. There are actually large gaps between kinds. So there's no fossil transitional forms in going on with these tiny steps at all. That these transitional forms have not been found is perhaps the greatest evidence against evolution. It's because we don't have any missing links. When I ever talk to an evolutionist, I say, well, you would think you at least find one missing link among one species, but they haven't found any that are credible. Here's some pictures that they thought here were missing links. Opponents of Darwin's ideas were paleontologists. What? Opponents, those that are against Darwin, were actually paleontologists? Studying fossils? Yes, sirree. We have Louis Agassiz from Harvard. We have John William Dawson from McGill. We have Arnold Guyot from Princeton. And they rejected evolution because they knew the fossil record very well. Even Darwin himself acknowledged the absence of transitional forms was a mortal weakness to his theory. Mortal weakness, he knew, if we don't find any transitional forms, I don't know if evolution is true. He said that himself. Geology, he said, this is his quote, geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain and is perhaps the most obvious and serious objection against the theory. So he says, because we haven't found any of these missing links, I have a serious problem in my theory. Remember, it's a theory, it's not a proven law. The origin of species was incomplete. The origin of species, as we have found out, was what Charles Robert Darwin, who was born February 12th in 1809 in Shrewsbury, England. He went to medical school and he studied to be, what? A clergyman? He studied to be a pastor? and then he finally became a naturalist. So the incomplete, he wrote The Origin, and we went over that last video, so I won't get into it, but the fossil evidence was incomplete because the fossil evidence was yet to be found. They hadn't found any. So Darwin was hoping to find this fossil evidence in the future. His quote is, "The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. For my part, following out Lyell's," who's Lyell? We'll see. He put together the geographic column. "Following out Lyell's metaphor, I look to the geological record as an imperfectly kept, written, changing dialogue. So we possess the last volume in only 2 or 3 countries." So basically he's saying he's looking forward to finding more. He only had gone to a few countries, so he thought, well, possibly we'll find some fossils of missing links in the countries I haven't gone to. Here's a picture of some of the so-called missing links in Darwin. The lack of transitional forms. Since Darwin, over 100 million fossils have been found, representing over 250,000 species. They've all been excavated, cataloged, and put into museums. The fossil record cannot be dismissed anymore, because out of 43 living orders of terrestrial vertebrates, 42 of them are represented in the fossil records. Out of 329 living families, 261 vertebrates are and over, with outside of birds, 88%. There has not been a single transitional form despite 160 years of seeking for a missing link. Seeking for one. We've been trying to look for these missing forms for 160 years. The fact is, no true, unquestionable transitional forms or missing links have ever been found to bridge the gap between different kinds of organisms. Okay, you can look it up and you'll see, of course, the evolutionists will be there and they'll show you all kinds of pictures, but none of these have been proved to be a transitional form. Here's a picture here. I wanted to go over this because I had this in my book when I was in biology back in the 70s. But here we have the whale, and then the whale's supposed to, the whale is the modern, and then what happened, it developed, these legs on here, came crawling out of the sea. The whale was there, came crawling out of the sea, and turned into a walking whale. With these legs. You know what? These are not legs. And even they actually, and some of them have found these rotating fins, but they're still fins. A lot of these fins are used in reproduction of fish. The fossil record upholds the biblical truth. Isn't that the way? Here we have the fossils upholding just what the Bible says. Thousands of extinct kinds of animals have been revealed, but all are distinct kinds. They're all different kinds. They haven't been evolving at all. In Genesis 1, 11 and 12, 21, 25, kinds do not change into other kinds of living things. Every creature produces after its kind. Wow, this is confirming the Bible. This is a glaring contradiction in Darwin's predictions, don't you think? Fossil records make it absolutely clear evolution had not occurred. Okay, but then the evolutionists think, but there must be a reason we can't find any missing links in transitional fossils. So they developed punctuated equilibrium. What is that? Well, paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge proposed this theory of punctuated equilibrium in 1972. Again, it's a hypothesis, which means it's a guess. It's not even a theory yet. And they suggested that evolution occurs in sudden spurts, followed by long periods without any noticeable change. not really like Darwin's. He said basically just constant change. Well, they believed drastic environmental changes would cause rapid changes over thousands and millions of years. They point out this happens in isolated groups of animals and plants. So if animals or plants are isolated on an island, they would go through punctuated equilibrium and change into new kinds. Since they happened too quickly, the changing process happened too quickly, they said, well, we don't really have any evidence because it just happened so quick. Oh yeah, really? But you see, there is still no evidence of transitional fossils, but rather an attempt to explain away the fact that fossil record does not support evolution. Here's a picture like this. It says these little trilobites, and they're talking. So could you explain punctuated equilibrium? You've been talking to Gould, haven't you? What has he put you up to? They believe these tiny type cells. Now this is nothing in development. You know what? The cell is so complicated, it's ridiculous. And they believe the cell was very simple. And now we know it's very complicated. There's actually, whole armies of cells in the blood, and the cell has all kinds of, I'm not going to get into the cell. We'll get into that later on. Fossil record versus the geological column. So the Bible teaches that the earth and living things did not develop gradually, but were divinely created. Wow, foundational. But evolutionists, present the fossil record from primitive organisms deep in the earth's crust to modern organisms near the surface. The geological column is simple to complex. And it's a sequence of fossils, and they call this the geological time chart. The implication is if you take a slice of the Earth's crust from the bottom to the top, you'd find the simplest to the complex, and you'd find this over 4.6 billion years. Here's a picture here. You have all these so-called simple organisms, and all of a sudden you have the next group all the way up to man, actually. And you'd find these fossils in certain areas of this geological time chart. What do you think about this? In school, we had to memorize this geological column. And now I find out it's bogus. Lyell was not telling the truth, right? He told a big lie, although he probably was deceived. The geologic column, an imaginary arrangement. The hypothetical, that means hypothetically was a guess. The hypothetical column is divided into 4 major time divisions called eons, and it's subdivided into eras, periods, and epochs. So here you have eons. So we're going to talk about that was eons ago while we're talking about the geological column. And then eras, periods, and epochs. And we'll see that in just a little bit. This is not really a description of the order of rocks and fossils in the Earth's crust, though. This is because it is hypothetical arrangements of fossils and rocks taken from many different locations and habitats around the world and arranged accordingly to the evolutionary assumptions. So it's hypothetical. That means, it's a guess. The individual layers are incomplete. If they were present, it would be 100 miles thick, and it's not. The most you can see on Earth are a few rocks containing simple fossils overlain by a few containing complex fossils. Only 2 or 3 periods and are widely separated in their age. So you have only like 2 or 3 periods, and then you'll go on and there'll be a catastrophe or stuff, and you can't find the rest of the column. In many places, the fossils are not in order, and in some places they're totally reversed. Can you imagine that? Here we have the example of the Grand Canyon here, which disproves the geological column, and because we have the simpler organisms on the top of the Grand Canyon. And then we have here, of course, we have a layer of coal. You know, coal is organic. A huge layer of coal in the midst of this. Where should this be? It shouldn't be on the top of the geological column. Arrangement by assumption. So arrangement by assumption, they were arranging by assuming it. The succession of fossils of the geologic column occurs nowhere in the world. Nowhere. They are arranged mainly by habitat and mobility, not by evolutionary progress or evolution progression. So here we have, you know, these animals, they lived in their habitats and their mobility, and so it didn't happen as they thought it happened, as Lyell thought it happened. Trilobites are small, extinct marine arthropods, and they lived before the dinosaurs. And this is an assumption that they lived before the dinosaurs. It merely means that they lived in different places. So, and the layers are identified by index fossils. So they use these trilobites to say how old that portion of rock is. Well, we're going to find out about that. Here's a picture of the geological column. So we have going way down here. I want you to know this is Cambrian, the Cambrian period. Very important, because this period is when all kinds of life suddenly appeared. And before that, we see no life, don't we? And the Earth is supposed to be 4.6 billion years ago. How did they calculate that? We're going to find that. So we have, going through here, you can see, and you can memorize this if you want to. You know, I did back when, but why? Because we were taught that this was, you know, better than the Bible, you know, that this was true. And now come to find out, it's not true at all. Circular reasoning. Circular reasoning. I'm going to stop there because we're getting kind of long and we're going to finish this up. I'm still only about halfway through here, so let's stop and we'll do the next in the next. We're going to find out what circular reasoning is. And evolutionists use circular reasoning. If you go to a museum and they try to explain things to you, you can stand up and say, hey, that's circular reasoning. And we'll find out about that in our next video.